Let's get the verdict on the first episodes of Harry and Meghan's tell-all documentary series. They began airing at 8 o'clock this morning. The couple revealing they actually met on Instagram, and also Prince Harry saying he feels it is his duty to uncover the exploitation and bribery within the media.
Well, we're joined by Newsweek's chief royal correspondent, Jack Royston, journalist and campaigner Amal Fashanu. Good morning to both of you. Amal's from the Justin Fashanu Foundation, which tackles discrimination, and also Chris Shipp is here, ITV News royal editor. You've been watching the first episode. Chris, let's start with you, because we had a little tease from you earlier on today. Of all the things you were expecting, is it more dramatic? Is it less dramatic? What struck you, Chris?
Right, so I've been watching it on 1.5 speed, which I discovered this morning on Netflix you can do. So we've managed in the green room to get through episode 1 and the beginning of episode 2. A lot of it was just about their love story, as you say, sort of like meeting on Instagram and how it kind of was very secret, beautiful. They went to Botswana, they had an amazing time, and then suddenly their lives completely changed when the relationship became public. But you got little teasers of, like, how Meghan and Harry basically video diaried their way out of the royal family. Yeah. That might come as a surprise to some people, given that they were complaining against intrusion. It might create the impression that they were planning always to make some kind of Netflix documentary like this. Video diaries of them, we haven't seen it all yet. I'm sure there's more in the bits of episode 2 I haven't seen, and episode 3 I haven't quite got to yet. But, yeah, I think that for me, the issue is between the sort of you know, the criticism of their privacy being invaded by the press, and yet then we've got cameras inside their car filming them being chased by the paparazzi in the US. For me, that sits rather uncomfortably, as we were sort of saying earlier, about those pictures of them, allowing cameras to take pictures of them in very private moments. Of course, that's their decision. They're allowed to do that. But, you know, those explosive things about the royal family we haven't yet got to. But as you say, exploitation, bribery in the media was the big issue at the beginning, is all about press intrusion.
We've just seen pictures, of course, of his late mum, Princess Di. There is a moment where he opens up about fearing for the safety of his family. She is a woman who's clearly in despair.
Definitely. I think, you know, it's very moving, and I think this is an opportunity for them to actually say their truth. And I think that what they actually might have been planning all along is to tell their truth. And I think part of the reason why they have filmed every stage is because it was unreal. And for them, maybe this was just a way to kind of grieve and to, at one point, actually show people what was actually going on. You know, personally, my dad has been, you know, accused of a lot of things and in the press, and I remember as a child being, you know, followed to school and harassed, and a lot of the times when she's explaining and Harry's telling his story, you know, I did feel for him because of the level of anxiety that it does cause for you. So, you know, it's just an opportunity for them to actually explain what is actually happening.
It's such an interesting point you make there, because for people who have not been in the public eye, sometimes there's a misunderstanding about what it is like to have your photograph taken, and they assume that because you're famous like Harry and Meghan, or you're royal like Harry and Meghan, that you'd have to put up with it. You know, well, you get your photograph taken. What's the big deal? But what you're alluding to is actually there's a much more risky, threatening, uncomfortable feeling when that happens.
And also, I just feel like they're saying, you know, how much she loved it because she smiled. You know, it's very difficult. You know, how do you deal with it, especially if you've never actually been in that position before? You know, it must be extremely hard.
Yeah, and you know that your photograph's going to be used anyway. So you can't look endlessly miserable. She might feel under pressure that she wants that picture to be half decent. Doesn't mean... I mean, she talks, Jack, about consent in the documentary and how important it was that it was up to them to consent in the coverage of their children, for instance. I mean, they were very criticised when the babies were born, not being open, not sharing photographs, you know, not giving full disclosure about how the birth went ahead, making it very clear it's coverage on their terms.
Exactly, yes, that's true. So they have actually always wanted to share certain parts of their private lives, and they want to be able to connect with their fans and the people who love them, but they want to be able to choose which moments they put out into the public domain. But consent is actually a really interesting thing to bring up, because there's another fascinating part of this. We talked about Diana, and Harry actually gives a slightly different take to Prince William on that famous Princess Diana interview from 1995, the
With
big
Martin
tell-all.
Bashir.
With Martin Bashir, yeah. So he says, obviously, we now know she was deceived into giving it. You know, there's a consent dimension there. But Harry says she spoke her truth. And Prince William described it as a false narrative.
And doesn't want it seen or
shown, yeah.
shown. Chris, there's this reference to exploitation and bribery within the media. Are you clear what they're talking about there?
This is, I think, we're going to get to in later episodes, this whole, and we had a teaser of this in the documentary about stories being planted against him by other members of the palace. We haven't quite got to that yet. We had a sort of hint where he said, when it became sort of revealing his relationship with Meghan, that you have to trust people in the palace, but then it's not about whether you trust them, it's who do they trust and whether they're going to sort of leak that story. So I think we're going to sort of get to that bit at some point. But interesting, I mean, a lot of this stuff at the beginning is about his dislike, and understandable dislike, let's be clear here, about for the press. He said, the majority of my memories are being swarmed by the paparazzi. I mean, that's not a very nice way to begin your life as a little child, you know, just looking at these cameras, people running down the street.
Chris, we're nearly out of time. What do you think, from what you've seen, that the palace's reaction will be to what we've had already?
Well, you know, to be fair, I don't think we've got to the bits of criticism of the palace. I mean, there are some things where there's a temptation, he said, for men in the family to marry someone who fits the mould. There are other things as well. I think we haven't got there yet.
Okay.
And I think the palace will be waiting with bated breath
Episodes 2 and
to
3.
see what it's going to be.
Thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you, Janet.